Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever been to a music festival, tumbled down a rabbit hole on online forums, or even just sat through a high school health class back in the 90s, you have absolutely heard some incredibly wild stories about what psychedelics do to the human body. Well, today, we are putting those stories straight under the microscope. We're going to dive deep into the clinical biology and psychological realities to finally separate the actual pharmacology from the folklore. All right, let's just dive right into what is arguably the biggest, most persistent cultural rumor out there. The idea that if you crack your back, you somehow release hidden drug molecules and just magically start tripping again years later. It's this terrifying, almost sci-fi concept, right? The story goes that the drug gets permanently trapped inside your spinal column, and a quick trip to the chiropractor, or honestly just twisting the wrong way doing yoga, could literally squeeze out a phantom dose and send you plummeting right back into a hallucinogenic state. But here is what's so absolutely fascinating. When you look at the actual medical facts, they completely shatter this folklore. It turns out, this whole free trip concept, it's chemically and biologically impossible. The medical literature and modern addiction science unequivocally confirm that it does not and physically cannot stay in your spine forever. There are no spinal taps revealing hidden vials of the drug, and cracking your back is definitely not going to unlock some dormant trip. Section 1, Central Nervous System Anatomy. To really get why this myth completely falls apart, we have to look at how our bodies are actually built, not how urban legends tell us they're built. Now, your spinal cord is this absolutely brilliant anatomical highway. It's perfectly designed for transmitting neurotransmitters and electrical signals between your brain and the rest of your body, all safely protected by a fluid-filled cavity. But here's the critical, undeniable chemical reality. This substance is a water-soluble compound. And because it's water-soluble, it cannot physically accumulate, it can't crystallize, and it definitely cannot permanently bind to your spinal tissue or your spinal cord fluid. It just literally doesn't work that way. Part 2, how LSD is actually metabolized. So if it's not secretly camping out in your spine, where does it go and how fast does it leave? Well, the reality is incredibly fast-paced. Once ingested, the drug hits your bloodstream and your liver immediately goes to work. We're talking rapid breakdown. The liver converts the substance into inactive metabolites, the main one being a compound called OHLSD. The drug itself has a half-life of only about 3 to 4 hours. After that, those inactive metabolites are just naturally expelled from your body, mostly through urine. When we dig into the actual numbers from rehab testing data, the detection window in your bodily fluids is remarkably brief. In your bloodstream, the original substance is only detectable for maybe 6 to 12 hours. Tops. The metabolites might linger in your urine for a few days, usually up to about 4 days at the absolute most. Literally, the only place traces stick around longer is in the dead tissue of a hair follicle for up to 90 days, but absolutely not in your active nervous system. And that brings us to this absolutely wild number. Over 99% of the drug is completely eliminated from your system within a single day. Just think about that for a second. Within 24 hours of ingestion, your body has effectively processed and completely flushed out the compound. There is no biological storage locker keeping it around for a rainy day. Section 3, the reality of flashbacks. Okay, but if the drug is entirely gone in a day, what is actually happening when people experience a quote-unquote flashback years later? Because let's be clear, the distress and the visual changes that people report are very real. Well, to understand this, we have to shift gears from anatomy to psychology, specifically a condition called HPPD. That stands for Hallucinogen Persistent Perception Disorder. It's a genuine psychiatric condition, officially added to the diagnostic manual way back in 1986. What's happening here isn't a drug molecularly firing back up in your brain. It's a lasting change in how your brain processes visual information. And crucially, it's a non-psychotic disorder, which means patients are fully 100% aware that what they are seeing isn't actually real. Dr. Henry David Abraham, a pioneering psychiatric researcher in this field, put it brilliantly. He noted that for people dealing with the severe chronic form of this condition, it is not just a sudden, random flashback that hits them once a year. It's often a persistent, around-the-clock alteration of their visual filter. Their brain essentially stops filtering out the sensory background noise that the rest of us just naturally ignore. So forget the cinematic Hollywood version of a flashback where you completely lose touch with reality. The actual reality of HPPD is typically characterized by very specific, persistent visual disturbances. It's believed to be caused by a chronic disinhibition of the brain's visual processors.
People frequently report seeing visual snow, kind of like the static on a broken TV set, or palinopsia, which are those trails that follow moving objects. They might see glowing halos around lights, or subtle geometric patterns morphing on otherwise totally flat walls.
Now, here is where it gets really interesting. Anxiety acts like a massive feedback loop here. Everybody, and I mean everybody, experiences normal visual noise. You know those little clear eye floaters you see when you look up at a bright blue sky? Totally normal. But someone who has recently taken a psychedelic might suddenly notice these everyday aberrations, panic that they've somehow quote-unquote broken their brain, and start hyperfixating on them. That intense anxiety and hyperattention actually magnifies the visual distortions, trapping them in this super stressful feedback loop. Check out these numbers from a massive survey on the drug information site Arrowhead. It reveals something totally fascinating. A huge chunk of users, around 60%, actually report experiencing some minor visual phenomena, like a bit of static or some afterimages, for a few days after use. But here is the major takeaway. While noticing a bit of visual static is incredibly common, experiencing severe clinical distress from it is actually super rare. It affects only about 4% of respondents. And just to totally separate the science from the folklore here, medical literature confirms that these visual phenomena can actually be triggered by a really wide variety of substances. LSD definitely gets the majority of the blame, probably because of its intense cultural reputation lingering from the 1960s, but HPPD and persistent visual changes have been heavily documented after using MDMA, cannabis, synthetic cannabinoids, and, get this, even standard prescription SSRI antidepressants. It is fundamentally a neuroperceptual issue, not exclusively an acid issue. Section 4. Debunking other psychedelic superstitions. All right, since we've completely busted the spinal cord myth and shed some light on the true nature of HPPD, let's do a rapid-fire fact check on a few more pervasive superstitions. This is based on data compiled from professional integration coaches who literally deal with these fears every single day. Does a single bad trip make you permanently psychotic? The data shows this is highly, highly unlikely unless there's a severe, pre-existing psychological condition at play. Will looking at a mirror trap your soul or dissolve your ego permanently? Nope. Mirrors just amplify whatever internal psychological projections you're already experiencing. Do these drugs permanently mutate your DNA? False again. They temporarily alter neuroplasticity, not your actual genetic code. And finally, if you fall asleep, do you slip into a coma? Absolutely false. Sleeping is perfectly safe. It's just practically impossible to do because your nervous system is so heavily stimulated. We also need to get real about the whole natural argument. A massive myth circulating right now is that because magic mushrooms literally grow in the dirt, they are just this inherently harmless organic supplement. But look, just because a compound is biologically natural does not mean it gets a free pass on potent pharmacological risks. Psilocybin is a powerful, mind-altering substance. It requires the exact same level of respect, responsibility, and strict dose control as any synthetic counterpart cooked up in a lab. But hey, it's not all busted myths. There's actually one piece of classic festival lore that totally holds up to scientific scrutiny. You will often hear that walking barefoot helps ground you. And it turns out the tactile sensation of walking barefoot on grass, or wood, or even a textured carpet genuinely calms the somatic nervous system. Grounding yourself physically with varied tactile input is a clinically proven way to reduce anxiety and anchor your brain when your visual or emotional processors are just feeling completely overwhelmed. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. We've seen that your spine isn't a secret drug stash, your DNA isn't mutating, and the infamous flashback is really a complex sensory processing disorder triggered by anxiety, not some dormant chemical explosion. When we finally strip away the urban legends and look squarely at the real hard data, what do you think? Does the actual science make the human brain seem more resilient to you, or just infinitely more mysterious? Thanks so much for joining us, and keep asking those tough questions.